Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases recorded in the history of Savannah, Georgia. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this narration. We're interested in knowing which places and what times of day or night these documented accounts reach. The autumn of 1838 settled over Savannah like a heavy shroud, the Spanish moss hanging from the oak trees, seeming to reach down a little further that year, as if trying to touch the cobblestone streets below. In the historical district, just east of Forsyth Park, stood the Harrington Mansion, a three-story Georgian revival home with imposing white columns and black shutters that seemed to watch passers-by like judgmental eyes. The property had been in the possession of the wealthy Harrington family for generations, but it was now solely inhabited by the recently widowed Josephine Harrington, a woman of 36 years who had buried her husband Thaddeus just 6 months prior. What makes this case particularly compelling is not merely the circumstances of Thaddeus Harrington's death, which the official record states was due to a fever, but rather the events that followed in the mansion during the autumn and winter of 1838. According to the Savannah Historical Society archives discovered during a renovation of their facilities in 1962, the widow Harrington was known for her weekly gatherings that began precisely 3 weeks after her period of mourning ended. These gatherings, initially described as simple tea socials among the elite women of Savannah society, gradually evolved into something far more troubling. The Harrington Mansion stood apart from its neighbors not just in its grandeur, but in its peculiar silence. Servants reported that despite housing only Josephine and her adult daughter Eleanor, age 22, the mansion often sounded as though it contained many more inhabitants. A diary entry from Josephine's lady's maid, Margaret Sullivan, recovered during the cataloging of personal effects from the estate in 1863, notes, "The madam's rooms creak and groan well into the night, though she insists she sleeps soundly. The sounds travel down the service stairs like footsteps, but not quite, more like something being dragged across the floorboards. When asked about it at breakfast, she merely smiles and says the old house is settling." Eleanor Harrington was described in contemporary accounts as a young woman of remarkable beauty and poise. Having finished her education at one of Philadelphia's most prestigious women's academies, she had returned to Savannah with prospects of marriage to several eligible young men from respected families. According to correspondence between Eleanor and her former schoolmate, Catherine Wells of Boston, recovered from the Wells family collection in 1951, Eleanor had expressed excitement about her future, writing, "Father has approved of Mr. William Montgomery's intentions, and I believe an arrangement shall be finalized by Christmas. Mother, however, seems reluctant to discuss the matter, insisting that my place remains at the mansion until matters of the estate are fully resolved." This letter, dated just 2 weeks before Thaddeus Harrington's death, represents the last known written communication from Eleanor to anyone outside the household. What makes this correspondence particularly noteworthy is a postscript that appears to have been added hastily. "Catherine, I must confess a strange development. Mother has taken to spending hours in Father's study, reviewing books I had never before seen in our library. Last night I observed her through the keyhole, tracing unusual patterns on Father's desk with what appeared to be gold dust. When questioned at breakfast, she claimed to be merely organizing his affairs. I fear grief has affected her more deeply than we suspected." The Harrington family's fortune had originated in shipping and cotton, but rumors had long circulated in Savannah society that Thaddeus Harrington's true wealth came from less reputable ventures. According to Port Authority records examined by historian Dr. James Whitaker, in his 1957 study of Savannah commerce, several Harrington vessels made regular voyages to North Africa and the eastern Mediterranean between 1825 and 1835, returning with cargo manifests that were suspiciously vague in their descriptions. Dr. Whitaker's notes, housed in the University of Georgia archives, suggest that Harrington may have been trafficking in antiquities, specifically Egyptian artifacts, during a period when European and American interest in such items was at its height. A letter from Thaddeus Harrington to a business associate in Alexandria, dated 1832 and recovered from a private collection in 1960, seems to support this theory. In it, Harrington writes, "The items you forwarded from the excavation near Thebes have arrived safely, though customs officials showed more interest than I would have preferred. The scrolls, in particular, appear to be of the exact nature I had hoped for, containing what my translator assures me are detailed accounts of the rites of preservation and transference so jealously guarded by the ancient priesthood. My wife shows a surprising aptitude for deciphering the more obscure passages, a talent I had not suspected she possessed." The weekly gatherings at the Harrington Mansion began in August of 1838. From parish records at St. John's Episcopal Church, we know that Josephine invited precisely 13 women, all widows of notable standing in Savannah society, to what she called her afternoon reflection circle. While publicly presented as a gathering for mutual support in widowhood, several accounts suggest a different purpose entirely. Martha Blackwood, a housekeeper employed at the neighboring Wilson estate, gave a statement to a Savannah Daily News correspondent in 1845 that has long been overlooked by historians. According to the newspaper's archived records, Blackwood claimed, "Those women arrived dressed in their mourning clothes, but left with smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. All was at sunset, never staying past dusk. And always the sound of coins changing hands, more than would be proper for simple refreshments or charitable donations." What makes Blackwood's account particularly notable is her description of the Harrington daughter. Miss Eleanor would be presented at the beginning of each gathering, wearing a different gown each time, but always standing silent in the parlor entrance, never speaking, never sitting with the ladies. She would stand there pale as death until her mother dismissed her with a nod. The last time I glimpsed her through the garden window, she appeared thinner than any living person ought to be. The merchant records of Harrison & Sons Apothecary, a business that operated on Bull Street until 1890, contain entries for unusual purchases made by Josephine Harrington during this period. According to ledgers preserved in the Georgia Historical Society collection, these included large quantities of myrrh, frankincense, and natron salt, items associated with ancient Egyptian embalming practices, as well as more common medicinal herbs known for their sedative properties. Most curious was a notation dated September 15, 1838, recording the purchase of prepared papyrus sheets, specially treated as per customer specifications, at a price that would equate to nearly $5,000 in today's currency. The autumn of 1838 progressed, and with it, the Harrington gatherings grew increasingly elaborate. According to merchant records from Morrison's Imports on Broughton Street, Josephine made several large purchases of exotic fabrics, peculiar herbs not common to Georgian cooking, and most curiously, significant quantities of gold leaf. The receipts, preserved in the business ledgers now housed in the Savannah Historical Archives, show that these purchases accelerated in October, with the final receipt dated October 30th, the day before All Hallows' Eve. During this same period, Eleanor Harrington's behavior began to attract attention among the household staff. The personal journal of Thomas Green, the Harrington gardener, contains several entries expressing concern about the young woman's condition. In an entry dated October 10, 1838, he wrote, "Miss Eleanor wandered into the garden before dawn today, dressed in her nightclothes with no regard for propriety. When I approached to offer assistance, thinking perhaps she was sleepwalking, she looked through me as though I wasn't there at all. Her lips were moving, though no sound emerged. When I reported this to Mrs. Harrington, she dismissed my concerns, saying her daughter had always been given to dramatic melancholy and would improve with time." John's Church reported that Eleanor had been observed sitting motionless in the mansion's library for hours, staring at a peculiar object described as a small golden figurine in the shape of a woman, with its face obscured by what appeared to be a veil made of actual fabric rather than metal. According to this account, when Eleanor was gently roused from her trance-like state, she responded only by saying, "Mother says I am to be the vessel, but I fear what will pour forth." What happened on the night of October 31st, 1838, has been pieced together from multiple sources, none entirely reliable on their own, yet together forming a disturbing mosaic of events. I noted, however, that she immediately locked the garden gate and instructed that the key be brought to her chamber each night thereafter. Another servant, whose identity is recorded only as C, in a statement given to the pastor of St. According to the night watchman's log recovered during the reorganization of city records in 1954, an unusual number of carriages arrived at the Harrington mansion that evening, not 13, as was customary for the widows' gatherings, but 26. The watchman noted, all carriages bore the markings of prominent families, though some appeared to have traveled some distance, with mud from the northern roads caking their wheels. The most compelling account of that evening comes from an unexpected source, a letter written by Dr. Thomas Fleming to his medical colleague in Charleston, dated November 2, 1838. Fleming, a respected physician who attended to many of Savannah's elite families, wrote, "I was summoned to the Harrington estate at an unconscionable hour last night, under the pretense of attending to the widow's daughter, who had reportedly collapsed. Upon arrival, I found the mansion's grand hall transformed beyond recognition, the furnishings removed, the floors covered in elaborate patterns drawn in what appeared to be gold dust, and the air thick with the scent of unfamiliar incense. The widow greeted me not in mourning attire, but in a gown of deep crimson that seemed entirely inappropriate for both her station and the hour. She led me not to her daughter's chambers, but to the cellar steps, insisting that Eleanor had fallen there. I noted the presence of several other women, all widows of my acquaintance, standing in a peculiar formation around the entrance to the cellar. None acknowledged my greeting. I descended the stairs with only the light of Mrs. Harrington's lamp to guide me. The cellar had been cleared of the usual household storage and wine racks. Instead, at its center, stood a table of dark wood, upon which lay not the daughter as I had expected, but a collection of objects I hesitate to describe in detail. Suffice it to say they appeared to be family heirlooms, arranged in a manner suggesting ritual rather than decoration. When I inquired again about the daughter's whereabouts, the widow merely smiled and said, "Eleanor has been exchanged for something far more valuable, doctor, something that will restore what time and circumstance have taken from us all." At this, the women who had followed us down the stairs began to produce small pouches from their reticules, each containing what appeared to be gold coins of foreign mint. These they placed upon the table among the heirlooms. I insisted on seeing the young woman immediately, or I would be forced to summon the authorities. At this, Mrs. Harrington opened a door I had not previously noticed, set into the stone wall of the cellar. "See for yourself, doctor," she said, "though I doubt you will find her condition much improved. What I witnessed in that hidden chamber I will not, commit to paper in full detail. I will say only that I found evidence suggesting the young woman had been kept there for some time, perhaps weeks, though there was no sign of her present whereabouts. The small room contained a narrow cot, restraints of an unusual design, and walls covered in writing that appeared to be a mixture of Latin and another language I could not identify. I fled the mansion immediately and attempted to alert the authorities, but found myself oddly disoriented upon reaching the street, unable to recall for some time where I had intended to go. By morning, when I had recovered my senses enough to return with the constable, the mansion appeared in perfect order, with Mrs. Harrington calmly taking breakfast in her morning room. Of Eleanor there was no sign, and the cellar, which we insisted on examining, contained nothing but the usual household stores and wine collection. The hidden door I had discovered was nowhere to be seen. Fleming's letter represents the last known reference to Eleanor Harrington in contemporary accounts. Official records indicate that Josephine explained her daughter's absence as an extended visit to relatives in Charleston, followed by a marriage to a European gentleman she had met there. No marriage certificate has ever been located, nor any passenger manifest showing Eleanor's departure from any American port. A curious footnote to this account appears in the diary of Rebecca Thornton, wife of a prominent Savannah merchant, dated November 5, 1838. According to this entry, preserved in the Thornton family papers donated to the Georgia Historical Society in 1932, Mrs. Thornton attended a small gathering at the home of a mutual acquaintance, where Josephine Harrington was present. She wrote, "Mrs. H. appears remarkably changed since I last saw her, merely a fortnight ago. The grief that had so visibly aged her seems to have miraculously lifted, and indeed she looks younger than I recall her appearing even before Mr. H.'s passing." When I remarked upon this transformation, suggesting that the sea air must be agreeing with her, she smiled in a most peculiar manner and said, "It is not the air, my dear, but rather a most beneficial exchange. One must sometimes surrender that which is most precious to regain what has been lost." When I inquired after her daughter, she changed the subject with such abruptness that I dared not raise it again. The widow Harrington continued to reside in the mansion for another 7 years, her gatherings becoming less frequent, but more exclusive. Tax records show that despite having no visible means of income following her husband's death, Josephine's wealth appeared to increase substantially between 1838 and 1845. The provenance of this newfound prosperity remains unexplained in any official documentation. During this period, Josephine became known for her philanthropy, contributing generously to St. John's Church and various charitable organizations in Savannah. Parish records indicate that she specifically directed her donations toward the establishment of a home for women of good family fallen upon difficult circumstances, particularly widows without financial means of support. The facility, named the Harrington Home for Gentlewomen, opened in 1841 on the outskirts of Savannah and operated under Josephine's personal supervision. According to city records, the residents of this home were exclusively widows, 13 in number at any given time, who had formerly been members of Savannah's elite social circles. What makes this arrangement curious is not merely the specific number of residents, but the conditions of their residence as documented in a contract found among the papers of the city solicitor in 1952. This document, signed by each woman upon entry to the home, included a peculiar clause stating that residents agreed to participate in certain observances and rituals as directed by the benefactress, these being deemed essential to the spiritual and physical well-being of all concerned. The nature of these observances and rituals is not explicitly described in any surviving documentation. However, the Journal of Reverend Samuel Porter, who served as chaplain to the home from 1842 to 1844, contains several troubling entries. In one, dated March 1843, he wrote, "Today I arrived for the monthly service earlier than expected and observed Mrs. Harrington leading the ladies in what she quickly described as a simple meditation exercise. What struck me as unusual was not merely that they stood in a circle around a table bearing a golden object of some kind, but that each woman wore a small pouch around her neck, which Mrs. H. hastily instructed them to conceal upon noticing my presence. Later, when I inquired casually about these items, I was informed they contained memorial tokens of their late husbands. I note with some disquiet that several of these ladies, advanced in years as they are, show remarkable vigor and clarity of mind. Indeed, they appear to be growing younger in aspect rather than older with the passage of time." Porter resigned his position in late 1844, citing in his letter to the bishop, now preserved in the diocesan archives, grave concerns regarding practices at the Harrington home which, while perhaps innocent in intent, bear too close a resemblance to certain pagan observances to be countenanced by a man of cloth. No investigation appears to have followed this resignation, possibly due to Josephine's standing in the community and her generous contributions to the church. In the spring of 1845, a series of unusual events brought renewed attention to the Harrington mansion. According to police records, 3 separate incidents of trespassing were reported over the course of a single week in April. In each case, the intruder was identified as a woman in mourning attire who, when apprehended, claimed to have been invited by the widow Harrington, despite the hour being well past midnight. Each woman was described as being in a state of extreme distress, unable to explain coherently why she had attempted to enter the mansion. Most disturbing, each woman was found carrying a small portrait miniature of a young female relative, a daughter or niece, who had recently died or disappeared. The third of these incidents is documented in unusual detail in the personal journal of Officer James Sullivan of the Savannah Police. His entry, dated April 27, 1845, reads, "Responded to another disturbance at the Harrington place tonight. Found an elderly woman attempting to force entry through the garden gate. She identified herself as Mrs. Elizabeth Cavendish of Charleston, claiming she had traveled to Savannah specifically to meet with Mrs. Harrington regarding a transaction of mutual benefit. When I explained that the hour was inappropriate for social calls, she became agitated, insisting that the exchange must take place tonight, when the moon is dark. Upon searching her person, I discovered she carried a locket containing the portrait of a young woman whom she identified as her granddaughter, recently deceased. Most disturbing was her insistence that Mrs. Harrington could restore the girl through some process involving an equitable exchange. When I suggested we return in the morning to discuss her business with Mrs. H., she became frantic, claiming, 'It will be too late. She has promised the vessel is prepared, but it must be filled before dawn.' I escorted Mrs. Cavendish to temporary lodgings, intending to return her to Charleston in the morning. However, upon checking the room at daybreak, I found it empty, the window open despite being 3 stories above the street. No body was discovered below, nor any sign of how she might have departed. Upon returning to the Harrington mansion to make inquiries, I was informed by the butler that Mrs. Harrington had received no visitors and knew of no Mrs. Cavendish from Charleston. I note, however, that Mrs. H. appeared unusually fatigued during our brief conversation, with a tremor in her hands that she attempted to conceal. The final incident involving the Harrington mansion occurred on April 30th, 1845, exactly 7 years after the death of Thaddeus Harrington. According to fire brigade records, a blaze was reported at the mansion shortly after midnight. By the time responders arrived, the interior of the home was fully engulfed in flames. The official report states that the fire appeared to have originated in the cellar and spread with unusual rapidity throughout the structure. No human remains were recovered from the ruins, leading authorities to conclude that Josephine Harrington had not been home when the fire began. However, a curious detail emerges from the personal journal of Fire Captain James Merritt, which was donated to the Savannah Historical Society by his granddaughter in 1913. Merritt wrote, "Upon approaching the burning mansion, myself and 2 of my men observed what appeared to be a female figure standing at an upper window. The strange part was, she made no cry for help, nor any movement suggesting distress, despite the flames clearly visible behind her. She simply stood perfectly still, watching us approach. When we positioned our ladder to attempt rescue, the figure vanished, and the window through which we had seen her exploded outward in a shower of glass and flame." Merritt's account continues with a detail omitted from the official report. "While directing the water brigade, I observed a group of women standing across the street, observing the conflagration. Though the hour was past midnight, they were dressed as if for a social call, each wearing a black dress with a distinctive gold brooch or pendant. Most curious was their demeanor. They showed neither distress nor excitement at the spectacle, but rather a solemn satisfaction, as if witnessing the fulfillment of some long-anticipated event. When I approached to inquire whether they had information about the mansion's occupants, they dispersed with such rapidity that I was unable to question any of them directly. In the aftermath of the fire, as workers cleared the debris, several unusual discoveries were made. According to an inventory filed with the city council, the cellar of the mansion, which should have been a simple foundation with storage space, was found to contain a complex of small rooms extending well beyond the footprint of the house itself. These rooms appeared to have been sealed prior to the fire, accessible only through narrow passages that would have required knowledge of their exact location. Among the items recovered from these hidden chambers were 26 small gold figurines, each in the form of a woman with her hands clasped before her in a posture of supplication. Analysis conducted by a metallurgist from Atlanta in 1952 determined that the gold used in these figurines was of an unusual composition, containing trace elements not typically found in gold mined in North America or Europe. Most disturbing was the discovery that each figurine contained a small compartment in its base, and within each compartment was found a single human tooth. Also recovered from the cellar chambers was a collection of papers, partially burned but still legible in sections. These documents, described in the inventory as writings in various hands, some in English and some in unidentified languages, were placed in the custody of the mayor's office and subsequently disappeared from official records. However, a clerk involved in cataloging these items, Samuel Wilson, made personal copies of several pages before surrendering the originals. These copies remained in his family's possession until 1958, when his grandson donated them to the Savannah Historical Society. The Wilson papers, as they have come to be known, contain what appears to be a partial translation of an ancient text, with annotations in what handwriting experts have identified as Josephine Harrington's. One fragment reads, "The principle of transference requires a vessel of blood relation, prepared through the 13 cycles of purification. The essence thus extracted must be contained within a receptacle of pure gold formed in the image of the supplicant. When the 13 witnesses have made their offerings, and the final exchange is completed, that which was old shall become renewed, and that which was young shall bear the burden of years unlived." Another fragment, more disturbing in its implications, states, "Each participant in the circle must provide a token of intent, a small portion of that which they most desire to preserve. These tokens, when combined with the primary essence in the moment of exchange, ensure that all shall receive a measure of renewal proportionate to their contribution. The first participant, having provided the vessel, receives the greatest portion, but all who bear witness and make offering shall partake of the benefits." The fate of Josephine Harrington remains unknown. No record of her death or burial exists in Savannah or the surrounding counties. Similarly, no passenger manifests or property records indicate that she relocated elsewhere. It is as if, like her daughter before her, she simply vanished. A curious footnote to this mystery appears in the social pages of the Charleston Mercury newspaper, dated May 15, 1845, just 2 weeks after the Harrington Mansion fire. A brief item notes the arrival in Charleston society of a striking young widow from abroad, said to be returning to her native city after some years in Europe. The lady, who gives her name as Mrs. Eleanor Montgomery, has taken up residence in the former home of the late Mr. and Mrs. Cavendish on Tradd Street, recently acquired through the offices of a local banker. Mrs. Montgomery is described as being of unusual beauty and refinement, though somewhat reserved in company. No further mentions of this Mrs. Montgomery appear in Charleston records after 1845, nor any documentation confirming whether she might have been connected to the Harrington family. The name Eleanor Montgomery is, of course, suggestive, combining as it does the name of the missing Harrington daughter with that of her reported fiancé. However, without further evidence, this remains merely an intriguing coincidence. In 1862, during the Civil War, a Union soldier stationed in Savannah wrote to his wife in Massachusetts about local legends surrounding the ruins of the Harrington property, which had never been rebuilt after the fire. According to his letter, now preserved in the Massachusetts Historical Society collection, locals claimed that on certain nights, particularly those of the new moon, The sound of women's voices could be heard emanating from the empty lot, engaged in what seemed to be a litany or chant. He wrote, "The Negro servants refuse to pass by after dark, claiming that those who linger near the ruins find themselves drawn toward the cellar steps that still descend into the earth, though the house above is long gone. They say the widow still holds her gatherings there, and that once invited, one can never truly decline." The soldier, Lieutenant William Barrett, further noted, "A curious tale circulates among both white and colored residents of this city regarding 13 prominent Savannah ladies who in the years before the fire were known to be associates of the widow Harrington. According to this account, each of these women, though advanced in years, displayed a remarkable preservation of youth and vigor following their association with Mrs. H. Most peculiar is the claim that after the Harrington mansion burned, these women began to age with unnatural rapidity, as though making up for lost time. Within a year, it is said, all 13 had died, appearing in their final days to be far older than their actual years. Barrett's letter includes a detail that connects this local legend to the physical evidence recovered from the site. The servants speak of golden trinkets that each lady was known to possess, small figurines said to be carried always on their persons, usually suspended from a chain around the neck and concealed beneath their clothing. At the death of each woman, the figurine was reportedly missing, though searches were made. The supposition among the more superstitious is that these objects somehow returned to their source in the ruins of the mansion, a fancy I would dismiss entirely were it not for the known discovery of similar items among the debris of the fire. In 1868, a professor of anthropology from the University of Virginia, Dr. William Harrison, traveled to Savannah to investigate rumors of unusual artifacts discovered at the Harrington site. His research notes, published posthumously in an academic journal in 1871, describe his interviews with several elderly women of Savannah society who claimed to have known Josephine Harrington personally. According to Harrison's notes, these women spoke of Josephine's obsession with ancient practices. She claimed to have learned from a collection of texts brought back from Egypt by her late husband. One interviewee, identified only as Mrs. G., told Harrison Josephine believed there existed a method by which youth and vitality could be transferred from one person to another, not merely as a rejuvenating treatment, but as a complete exchange of fortunes. She spoke often of the ancient Egyptian practice of substitute offerings, whereby one life could be offered to spare another. In her grief after Thaddeus passed, this idea seemed to consume her entirely. Harrison's notes also reference a leather-bound journal reportedly belonging to Josephine, which had been in the possession of her former lady's maid. The journal, which Harrison was permitted to examine but not keep, allegedly contained detailed instructions for a ritual involving the consecration of 13 witnesses, the sacrifice of bloodkin, and the collection of life's essence in vessels of pure gold. Harrison described the text as being written partly in English and partly in a cipher he could not decode. The current whereabouts of this journal, if it indeed existed, remain unknown. A particularly disturbing entry in Harrison's notes concerns his interview with an elderly man who had been employed as a stable hand at the Harrington estate in 1838. This individual, whose name is given only as Thomas, claimed to have observed unusual activities in the weeks leading up to Eleanor Harrington's disappearance. The mistress had the young lady's meals prepared special, with herbs and such mixed in that smelled foreign-like. Miss Eleanor grew weaker by the day, sleeping more and more, while the mistress seemed to gain in strength. One night I heard such keening from the house as froze my blood, a sound like no natural thing should make. Next morning Miss Eleanor was pale as a ghost, hardly able to stand, while the mistress looked 10 years younger overnight. When I mentioned this to the housekeeper, she hushed me and said some things were better not noticed if a man valued his position or his life. Harrison's research was abruptly terminated when he fell ill with a mysterious malady shortly after his return to Virginia. His notes describe symptoms including sudden aging, his hair reportedly turning white within days, and a progressive weakening that physicians of the time were unable to diagnose or treat. He died within 3 months of his visit to Savannah, his appearance, according to the attending physician's report, being that of a man 30 years his senior, despite being only 42 at time of death. The final documented reference to the Harrington case comes from a series of letters exchanged between the Savannah police chief and his counterpart in New Orleans in 1892. The correspondence, discovered during a digitization project of police archives in 1964, discusses a series of disappearances in both cities involving young women from prominent families. The New Orleans police chief noted similarities between these cases and the Harrington incident of '38, suggesting that someone might be attempting to recreate the events that had occurred in Savannah decades earlier. Most disturbing is the final letter in this exchange, dated December 12, 1892, in which the Savannah police chief writes, "We have apprehended a suspect in the recent disappearance of Miss Caroline Ford. You will be interested to know that among her possessions was found a miniature golden figurine identical in design to those recovered from the Harrington cellar." When questioned about its provenance, the woman, who refuses to give her name but appears to be in her 60s or 70s, claims it was a gift from an old friend who understood the value of youth. Most remarkably, this woman bears a striking resemblance to portraits of Josephine Harrington, though she would now be well over 90 years of age. She appears, however, not a day over 60, with a vitality that belies even that estimate. No further correspondence regarding this suspect exists in the archives, nor any record of her formal arrest, trial, or incarceration. The case of Caroline Ford remains officially unsolved. A handwritten note, found attached to the police file and initialed by the chief, adds a curious postscript to this affair. Suspect escaped custody under circumstances that defy explanation. The cell was found empty this morning, the door still locked, with no sign of forced exit. The guard reports having checked on the prisoner at midnight, finding her asleep, then discovering her absence at the change of watch at 4 a.m. The only item remaining in the cell was a small golden coin of foreign mint, unlike any in our evidence collection. Most disturbing is the guard's condition. A man of 35 who has served on the force for a decade, he appears to have aged dramatically overnight, his hair now gray and his hands showing the tremors of advanced age. He has been granted leave pending medical examination. The lot where the Harrington mansion once stood remained vacant until 1923, when it was finally purchased by the city of Savannah and converted into a small public garden. During the excavation for this project, workers reported finding numerous small objects of gold buried throughout the property, coins, jewelry fragments, and small ingots, all of unusual composition. These findings were documented by the city surveyor, but subsequently disappeared from the municipal vault where they had been stored, pending further study. One worker involved in the excavation, James Miller, gave an account to the Savannah Morning News in 1925, describing a particularly unusual discovery. While digging the foundation for the central fountain, we uncovered what appeared to be a small chamber some 8 feet below ground level, lined with stone unlike any used in Savannah construction. Within this chamber was a stone sarcophagus of ancient design, its lid sealed with a substance resembling pitch or resin. The foreman ordered it left undisturbed until proper authorities could be notified, and the site was secured overnight. By morning, however, both the chamber and its contents had vanished, the excavation filled in with earth that showed no sign of recent disturbance. When we questioned the night watchman, he claimed to have observed nothing unusual, though he admitted to having dozed briefly around midnight. Most curious was his appearance. Though a young man when hired the previous day, he now appeared significantly aged, his hair thinned and whitened, his posture stooped. He resigned his position that afternoon, citing sudden ill health. Visitors to the garden, now known as Harrington Square, occasionally report unusual phenomena, the sensation of being watched from empty benches, the sound of whispering when no one is nearby, and most commonly, the overwhelming urge to depart before sunset. Tour guides often include the location in their haunted Savannah circuits, though the story they tell bears little resemblance to the documented facts of the case, focusing instead on more conventional ghost stories involving tragic romance and unrequited love. Perhaps most unsettling are the reports, beginning in the 1950s and continuing to the present day, of an elderly woman occasionally seen visiting the garden in the early morning hours. According to groundskeepers and early rising neighbors, this figure, always described as elegantly dressed in somewhat outdated fashion, can be observed walking the perimeter of the garden precisely 13 times before departing. Those who have encountered her report that she often stops to speak with young women who happen to be in the vicinity, apparently asking them detailed questions about their families and circumstances. Several young women have reported that during these conversations, the elderly visitor offered them a small gift, invariably declined, of what appeared to be a golden coin. One such encounter, documented by a Savannah College of Art and Design student in a 1967 oral history project, is particularly noteworthy. The student, identified as Margaret Wilson, recorded an interview with an elderly resident of a nursing home located near Harrington Square. The woman, then in her 90s, claimed to have met the mysterious visitor in 1955, when she herself was a young woman of 22. Coincidentally, the same age Eleanor Harrington had been at the time of her disappearance. According to the transcript of this interview, the woman said, "She approached me on a foggy morning in early April, asking if I might assist her in locating a particular grave in the Colonial Cemetery nearby. She said it belonged to a relative, a daughter, I believe. Though she appeared quite elderly, there was something in her manner that suggested greater vigor than her appearance conveyed, as if she were an actress, playing the part of an old woman rather than truly being one. What struck me most was her interest in my own circumstances. Upon learning I was unmarried and caring for my ailing mother, she expressed great sympathy, commenting that the burden of caring for others often ages us before our time. She then asked, in what seemed an abrupt change of subject, whether I had ever considered what I might be willing to exchange for a life free from such burdens. When I expressed confusion, she opened her purse and removed a small object wrapped in silk. Unwrapping it, she revealed a figurine of gold, a woman's form, beautifully crafted, with what appeared to be a hinged compartment in its base. "This could be yours," she said, "a talisman of sorts that would ensure your youth and vigor long after others your age have withered. All that is required is a simple exchange, something you value less than your own vitality." I asked what such an exchange might entail, and her reply chilled me despite the morning's warmth. "Everyone has someone in their life who drains them, my dear, someone whose continued existence diminishes your own. The exchange simply reverses that flow, allowing you to flourish while they bear the burden of time's passage." When I stepped back in alarm, she smiled as if I had misunderstood a harmless jest, rewrapped the figurine, and departed, though not before placing her calling card in my hand. It bore only an address, 13 Trad Street, Charleston, and the initials J.H. Most disturbing was what occurred when I returned home that morning. My mother, whose illness had confined her to bed for months, greeted me from her chair by the window, claiming she felt stronger than she had in years. Her improvement lasted precisely 13 days, during which I myself fell into a state of inexplicable exhaustion. On the morning of the 14th day, I found Mother dead in her bed, her appearance that of a woman 30 years older than her actual age. Clutched in her hand was a golden coin I had never seen before, identical to the one the strange woman had shown me in the garden. The Wilson recording concludes with a detail the interviewer found particularly unsettling. The woman insisted on showing me a photograph she had kept since her mother's death, the calling card given to her by the elderly visitor in 1955. Though yellowed with age, The address and initials remained clearly visible, along with something she hadn't noticed at the time. A small embossed seal in the corner depicting a female figure with arms upraised in a posture identical to the golden figurines recovered from the Harrington cellar. The last verified document relating to the Harrington case is a brief report filed by a Savannah police officer in 1968, just 1 century and 30 years after the original events. The officer, responding to a call about unusual activity in Harrington Square, reported finding evidence that someone had been digging in the center of the garden overnight. According to his report, a hole approximately 3 feet deep had been excavated, and at its bottom was placed a collection of 13 women's gloves, right hands only, arranged in a circle. At the center of this circle was a small portrait miniature in an ornate golden frame. The image it contained was that of a young woman whose features, according to the officer's description, matched those of Eleanor Harrington from the single surviving portrait of her housed in the Savannah Historical Society. The portrait and gloves were collected as evidence, but vanished from the police property room before they could be properly cataloged. The officer who filed the report requested a transfer the following day and left the Savannah Police Department within the month. His subsequent whereabouts are unknown. A supplementary note to this report, discovered during a review of case files in 1970, but subsequently removed from official records, contains the officer's personal observations. Upon handling the portrait miniature recovered from the excavation, I experienced a sensation unlike any I have previously encountered in 15 years of police work. A sudden chill, followed by a feeling of profound fatigue that persisted for several days. During this period, I was troubled by unusual dreams in which I found myself conversing with a young woman who identified herself as Eleanor, though her appearance shifted constantly between youth and advanced age. In these dreams, she repeatedly asked if I would stand witness to the exchange, saying that they needed a 13th and that I had been chosen. After the third such dream, I awakened to find on my bedside table a small golden coin of unfamiliar design, though my doors and windows remained locked. It was at this point that I determined a change of location was necessary for my continued well-being. In 1972, an assistant curator at the Savannah Historical Society, Dr. Elizabeth Morgan, undertook what would be the final formal investigation into the Harrington case. Her research notes, which she shared with a colleague at the University of Georgia, but which were never officially published, document her attempts to trace connections between the original events of 1838 and subsequent incidents in Savannah and Charleston. Morgan's most significant discovery was a pattern of real estate transactions involving properties in both cities. According to her analysis, a succession of homes on Tradd Street in Charleston had been purchased at 13-year intervals between 1845 and 1971, each time by a woman described in property records as a widow of independent means. While the names varied, Morgan noted that they all shared a peculiar characteristic. Each was a combination of names associated with the Harrington family or their social circle in 1838. The most recent such transaction, completed in January 1971, listed the purchaser as Eleanor Montgomery Harrington, a name that Morgan found particularly suggestive given the historical context. Her attempts to locate this individual for an interview were unsuccessful, with neighbors reporting that the house appeared to be occupied only occasionally, primarily for social gatherings of ladies of a certain age, held at monthly intervals. Morgan also documented a pattern of disappearances in both Savannah and Charleston, primarily of young women from prominent families, occurring at approximately 7-year intervals between 1845 and 1971. While none of these cases had been officially connected by law enforcement, Morgan noted that in several instances, investigations had been abruptly terminated following the discovery of evidence suggesting the missing women had left voluntarily for Europe or other distant locations. In each case, a letter purportedly from the missing woman would arrive shortly after her disappearance, explaining her sudden departure and asking that no effort be made to locate her. Most disturbing was Morgan's discovery that several of these letters, when examined by family members years after the disappearances, appeared to have been written in handwriting that did not match that of the missing women. In at least 3 cases, subsequent investigation revealed that the postmarks on these letters predated the disappearances they purported to explain, a fact overlooked in the original investigations. Morgan's research came to an abrupt end in April 1972, when she herself disappeared while on a research trip to Charleston. Her car was found parked near the house on Trad Street she had been investigating, but no trace of Morgan herself was ever discovered. Her notes were found in her hotel room, along with a final journal entry expressing her intention to attend what she described as an exclusive gathering of Charleston ladies, to which she had received a surprising invitation that morning. The only additional item recovered from Morgan's room was a small golden coin of unusual design found in her purse. Analysis later determined this coin to be of identical composition to the fragments recovered from the Harrington Mansion ruins, though it appeared newly minted rather than weathered by time. In a development that echoes elements of the original Harrington case, a woman identifying herself as Elizabeth Morgan appeared in Savannah society approximately 1 year after the researcher's disappearance. According to social columns in the Savannah Morning News, this individual, described as a youthful widow recently returned from abroad, purchased a home near Harrington Square and became known for hosting monthly gatherings of ladies of refinement and independent circumstances. Photographs of this Elizabeth Morgan taken at charity events between 1973 and 1980 show a woman who bears only a passing resemblance to the missing researcher, similar in general features, but appearing significantly younger and more refined in manner. When questioned by a journalist in 1975 about the coincidence of names, she reportedly smiled and said, "Life is full of strange repetitions, is it not? Perhaps there is something in this lovely city that calls to those of us named Elizabeth, drawing us here to fulfill some purpose we ourselves may not fully comprehend." The garden that now occupies the site of the former mansion remains open to the public during daylight hours. Visitors are welcome to walk its paths, admire its carefully maintained flower beds, and sit upon its wrought iron benches, though locals still tend to avoid the area after sunset. The most peculiar feature of the garden, noted by many but officially unacknowledged, is that, despite the gardener's best efforts, no plant with golden flowers will grow within its boundaries. Any such plantings, marigolds, goldenrod, daffodils, wither and blacken within days, as if rejecting the soil itself. Perhaps it is merely a quirk of the garden's composition, some mineral content hostile to certain forms of plant life. Or perhaps, as some whisper, it is because the earth there has already consumed all the gold it can hold, along with whatever was traded to obtain it. In 1989, during renovations to the garden's central fountain, workers uncovered a small lead box buried approximately 6 feet below the surface. According to the foreman's report, filed with the Parks Department, but subsequently removed from public access, the box contained a single item, a leather-bound journal with the name Eleanor Harrington inscribed on its cover in gold leaf. The journal was immediately transferred to city officials and has never been made available for public examination. One worker present at the discovery, however, claimed to have glimpsed several pages of the journal before it was confiscated. In an anonymous interview given to a local paranormal researcher in 1995, he described seeing entries dated October 1838, written in a delicate female hand. According to this account, the final entry read, "Mother has explained what she calls the exchange to me at last. She says that youth and beauty are commodities like any other, to be traded by those wise enough to understand their true value. She has found, she says, in Father's Egyptian texts, the method by which one person's vitality may be transferred to another through a ritual of substitution. All that is required is a vessel of appropriate bloodline and 13 witnesses willing to make offering of their own essence in smaller portion. I am to be the vessel, she says, while she and her circle of widows shall be the beneficiaries. The preparation begins tonight with the new moon. I have locked this journal in my secret place, hoping someone might find it and understand what has happened, should I no longer be myself, when next the sun rises. The records of the Harrington case were sealed by order of the mayor in 1969 and remain inaccessible to researchers and the public alike. The official reason given was preservation of historical materials, but those familiar with the archives suggest a different motivation, one stemming from the discovery that 3 young women who had reported encounters with the elderly visitor to Harrington Square subsequently disappeared from their homes, leaving behind only a single gold coin placed upon their pillows. A final troubling footnote to this historical case emerged in 2005 when a construction project adjacent to Harrington Square unearthed what appeared to be human remains during excavation for a new foundation. According to the initial forensic examination, the skeleton was that of a young woman, approximately 20 to 25 years of age, who had died sometime in the 19th century. Most unusual was the condition of the remains. The bones showed signs of rapid extreme calcium depletion, as if the body had aged decades in a matter of days or weeks before death. The official report on these remains was classified by order of the City Council, and the construction project was quietly relocated to another site. The excavation was filled in without further investigation, and a small memorial garden was established on the spot, dedicated to those whose lives were shortened that others might prosper. Each year, on the night of October 31st, groundskeepers at Harrington Square report finding evidence that someone has visited the garden after closing hours. 13 white roses arranged in a circle around the central fountain, each bearing a single drop of what appears to be gold paint on its petals. Lab analysis of samples taken in 1998 determined this substance to be actual gold, in a liquid form achieved through a process unknown to modern metallurgy. In Savannah, they say, history never truly dies. It merely waits, patient as the Spanish moss, for the right moment to continue its interrupted tale. And in Harrington Square, as twilight approaches and the shadows lengthen, it sometimes seems as though the mansion still stands, its windows glowing with lamplight, and the sound of 13 women's voices can be heard, counting their golden treasures and waiting for the next exchange to be offered. For those who find themselves in Savannah and are drawn to visit this unassuming garden, a word of caution: should you encounter an elegantly dressed elderly woman who offers you a golden trinket in exchange for what she calls a small burden you already carry, politely decline and depart before sunset. The price of acceptance is higher than it appears, and some bargains once struck cannot be undone, not in this life, nor perhaps in any other. The Harrington legacy continues in whispers and shadows, in the rustle of Spanish moss and the gleam of gold in the afternoon sun. The exchange she began in 1838 remains unfinished, the circle of 13 ever seeking to complete itself once more. And somewhere, perhaps in a grand house on Trad Street in Charleston, or in a stately home near Forsyth Park, a woman who has worn many names over many decades waits patiently for the cycle to begin again, for youth to be traded for gold, and gold for years that were never meant to be claimed. In the words allegedly found in Eleanor Harrington's journal, the vessel empties, but is never truly gone. The essence transfers, but is never truly at rest. Mother says the exchange is fair, but I wonder, when all the years have passed that were purchased with another's youth, where does that debt finally come due? And who, in the end, will be left to pay it?